Welcome back to Face the Nation. Thursday is Earth Day, and President Biden will be hosting a global virtual summit to discuss the climate challenges facing us all. CBS News is devoting this week to an extensive look at climate change in our series, Eye on Earth, Our Planet in Peril. We pick up our interview with French President Emmanuel Macron on just that topic. I want to ask you about climate. President Biden brought the U.S. back into that Paris Climate Change Accord 3 months ago, but hardly any of the countries that signed it, including yours, have actually met their targets. And now President Biden is going to ask for further cuts to emissions. What makes you think it'll be achievable this time?
Yes, I think because now it's time to deliver, it's time to rush, and President Biden is 100% right to do so. But I think the decision taken by your president in January this year was super important. Welcome back. I was extremely happy because now the US and the federal government decided to join again and to commit. Second, as Europeans, we increased our targets for 2030 and 2050 a few months ago because indeed we were lagging behind in comparison with our targets. And now we have to accelerate because we are living the first consequences of basically climate disorders. This is even more urgent than 5 years ago. So your president is right to increase the targets. But don't you need China and India to make those commitments? Yes, you're right. We need two things. We need to accelerate innovation and ability to deliver. We need India and China to be with us. India is very committed. And they are an emerging countries. This is a huge democracy with a lot of inequalities to deal with. But they launched with us the solar initiative 3 years ago now. They are improving their system, and they committed to reduce especially HFC emissions. They are super polluters and even worse than CO2. China remained in Paris Agreement. They increased their targets, but they are still for carbon neutrality in 2060 and a peak in 2030. Chancellor Merkel, we had a discussion with President Xi. And I think we felt the commitments of President Xi on climate to work with the US and with Europe. First, to accelerate his target of 2030 to have the peak emission, and in some cities and some regions to do better and faster. Don't leaders like yourself need to just speak plainly to the public and say, look, this needs to happen. It may cost you your job. It may mean prices go up, but this is a price that all of you have to pay in order to meet these targets? Look, I think obviously we will have to change a lot of things in our economy. We have to increase the price of carbon, and we have to help this transition to happen for our entrepreneurs and our households. If you go to the White House or the Élysée Palace to say, now guys, you will have to adapt yourself, you will pay a much higher price and so on, I can tell you, you will increase social inequalities. I did such a mistake, I have to say, and I can tell you in 2018, because we underestimate the impact on middle classes. So you have to accompany people, and we have to accept for a few years to invest public money in these transitions, to help innovation and diffusion of this innovation. You have to accept to change business models and behavior of investors to finance green investments and to penalize those who don't make this move. And you have to accept to accompany your households to make these investments and make it feasible for them. We have to help middle classes and poor people to make this change with us. This is a comprehensive and inclusive agenda. I'm sure about that now. And I can tell you with a lot of humility, I'm even more sure because I made mistakes myself.
Mr. President, there are roughly 31,000 Russian troops amassed on the border of Ukraine right now. What will France do if Vladimir Putin invades?
I think the situation is unacceptable. Russia has to de-escalate. This is clear. The situation today and the level of tension at the border is absolutely counterproductive and unacceptable. We want now a political process to deal with some Ukrainian regions and to pacify
But Vladimir Putin has blown that off
for Ukraine and Ukrainian people.
And sanctions have not stopped him. Those diplomatic efforts have not stopped him. You yourself have referenced NATO as being brain dead. What is actually going to stop Vladimir Putin from invading?
Look, I think what happened a few years ago when Ukraine was invaded, it's not a failure of diplomacy. It's a failure of our collective credibility vis-à-vis Russia. And I think when we put red lines, we have to make them respected by our people and the others. And I think we have to be clear and tough. It was a failure of a naive approach vis-à-vis Russia. I'm definitely in favor of discussion with Russia, with an open, quiet and respectful discussion with Russia. But I think that when we put red lines, we have to be sure to be credible and to make these red lines respected by the others. Now in Ukraine,
Understood.
If we want to be efficient, we have to accelerate the diplomatic agenda, and US, Europe, all of us have to be very clear vis-à-vis Russia. We will never accept a new military operation on the Ukrainian soil, and we have to build the way to be credible vis-à-vis that.
Do you think that what President Biden did with sanctions will make any difference to Vladimir Putin this time? Will it stop him?
I think we need an approach, to be clear, based on two pillars. One, dialogue, and I fully share as well the willingness of your president to dialogue, and I'm sure that President Putin can be ready to reopen dialogue. But if we want a better system in terms of arms control, if we want to stabilize a lot of existing crises in the world today, we need an open and frank dialogue with Russia. On the other side,
will you sanction
we have
Russia
to be
if he
clear
invades?
when we are not aligned. And I think after an unacceptable behavior, indeed we have to sanction. This is what we did after Ukraine, or after a series of crises which happened. And I think we have to define clear red lines with Russia. This is the only way to be credible. I think that sanctions are not sufficient in themselves, but sanctions are part of the package.
Mr. President, I'm being told that we are running out of time, but I want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. No, I was happy to have the opportunity to answer your questions. And I would just want to pass a very clear and simple message. I think we are, all of us, in the middle of a terrible crisis and a lot of fears. COVID-19, climate change, and so on, and security, inequalities, and so on. I do believe that our common values, I do believe that our strong faith in open and liberal democracies is the best way to address these challenges. We will have to invent a new model. We will have to regulate this capitalism. We will have to deal with inequalities. We will have to reinvent a new narrative and new actions, new investment on green technologies, new cooperation for vaccination. I think we have the opportunity to do it together and to build and invent our future. I'm a strong believer in this positive and ambitious agenda together. And I hope we will deliver hand in hand together.
We will watch
Thank
for that,
you.
Mr. President. Thank you. There was some big foreign news last week. After almost 20 years, America's longest war will finally come to an end, as President Biden announced that all troops will be out of Afghanistan by September 11th. U.S. intelligence warns that soon afterward, the Taliban may regain control of the country. According to the Pentagon, more than 2,400 Americans died in this war. More than 20,000 were wounded. We honor them and their loved ones for their service. We'll be right back. We spoke with President Biden's ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, earlier, and we asked about the upcoming climate summit, where the president is expected to press world leaders to make further pledges on cutting emissions. What new pledges has the U.S. secured? And without India and China on board, Isn't this going to be a bust?
I don't think it's going to be a bust. In fact, I think this is an opportunity for us to hear from other countries what new commitments they intend to make. We intend to encourage them to up their game and to openly express in this forum what they intend to do to deal with climate change. And we hope that India and China will join us.
I want to ask you about these thousands of refugees who have learned that they are now stranded. They thought they were coming to the United States, but they're in limbo because President Biden signed this cap on refugee admissions at this historically low number of 15,000. Why did he break his promise?
I don't think the president broke his promise. We're looking at this. This is a first step, and we're looking at the infrastructure that we have in place to support bringing refugees into the United States. That infrastructure was basically destroyed over the past 4 years. And so this is just a first installment, and I know that the president intends to revisit those numbers over the course of the next few months.
Well, just 2 months ago, the president said he'd up it to 62,000, and then yesterday he signed paperwork capping it at 15,000, and the White House cited unspecified burdens on the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Is that a way of saying that the migrant crisis at the U.S. border is stopping the U.S. from accepting refugees from all over the world?
I don't think that's the case. I worked on refugee resettlement issues in part of my career, and I know that to bring in refugees require a very extensive infrastructure of agencies that are involved in processing refugees, agencies that are involved in resettling refugees, and communities that will accept those refugees. That infrastructure has to be rebuilt so that we can ensure that we can bring refugees into the United States in an orderly fashion. And I know that that is what is right now under serious consideration and work, and I expect that our numbers will increase. The president is committed to refugees. He made that clear during the campaign, and he's made it clear over the past week.
So you do expect that goal of 62,500 to be met?
I know that that goal is there, and everything will be done to meet that goal. I also know how challenging it is to reach it, but I can say without any doubt that every resource that we have available to us will be put into reaching that goal and possibly even going beyond.
This past week, you gave a speech that I want to ask you about because it's gotten quite a lot of attention. You said the original sin of slavery weaved white supremacy into our founding documents and principles. You talked about white supremacy being linked to the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, continued discrimination against Muslims and Asian Americans. America likes to think it provides moral leadership to the world. Are you saying we're deluding ourselves?
No, I think we're being tremendous leaders. Our country is not perfect, but we continue to perfect it. Those imperfections are part of our history, and we have to talk about them. It's our strength that we can talk about our imperfections to the world and call out other nations for those same imperfections. So it's not a criticism, it's an acknowledgement of our history, it's an acknowledgement of where we started. But we need to look at where we've come. The fact that I came from a segregated high school and I'm now the permanent representative of the United States at the United Nations says everything about what our country is about. And I look forward to continuing to engage with other countries to use our example to show those other countries what they might achieve. But we still have a lot of work to do, and we have to acknowledge that, but we also have to work to continue to improve our country.
But it is precisely because of the role you have as a cabinet member that it drew so much criticism. I mean, the Wall Street Journal editorial board called you the ambassador of Blame America First, saying it sounded like you were reciting Chinese propaganda about America. and that you believe your job is to bring critical race theory to the world with a focus on criticizing your own country. To be clear, were you comparing bigotry in America to mass atrocities carried out against minorities around the world?
I was acknowledging what is a fact in the United States. Racism does exist in this country. And I think it was a powerful message. Imagine any other country doing that. Our country, the uniqueness of our country is that we can self-criticize and we can move forward. And our values are clear. And the purpose of that speech was to lay out our values, but also acknowledge our imperfections and acknowledge that we are moving forward. I don't think you will see a Chinese Uyghur getting on the national stage acknowledging China's issues with human rights. I'm not comparing our situation, I'm acknowledging that we've come a long way, and I'm very proud of what we have been able to achieve, but I'm realistic about what we have to do moving forward. And I think if we are going to be a voice around the globe for raising issues of human rights, we cannot whitewash our own issues in our own country.
Ambassador, I really want to ask you about Tigray. You said this week to the UN Security Council, do African lives not matter as much as those experiencing conflict in other countries? You were challenging them because of the systemic rape, the gang rapes that are being carried out against young girls in Tigray, in this conflict area in Ethiopia and Eritrea. This has been well documented. It's been called ethnic cleansing by the United States. Why haven't we heard from President Biden and Vice President Harris about this concern? What is the U.S. doing?
Well, I think you have heard from President Biden because you've heard from me and you've heard from Secretary Blinken. President Biden has engaged with the Ethiopian government. Secretary Blinken has engaged with the Ethiopian government. President Biden sent a presidential emissary, Senator Coons, to have discussions with the Ethiopian government and lay out our concerns about the horrific situation in Tigray. And as the U.S. representative on the Security Council, I thought it was important that the Security Council's voice also be added to the voices of concern about the situation there. We have seen
well, you're clearly saying what's being done is not enough.
It is not enough, and that's why I raised it in the Security Council, because I think we have to make sure that the victims hear our voices, but also the perpetrators know that we are concerned and that we're watching this situation like we're looking and addressing situations elsewhere in the world. So yes, I agree with you. More has to be done, and that was the purpose of my raising this issue.
Ambassador, I'm told we are at time. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Late yesterday, President Biden said that he limited the number of refugees entering the U.S. due to the influx of child migrants at the U.S. border. We couldn't do two things at once, he said, but he's promised to increase the numbers. We'll be right back. Other than the U.S., no country has seen more deaths due to COVID-19 than Brazil. The International Medical Aid Agency, Doctors Without Borders, is describing the situation there as a humanitarian catastrophe, as the country's daily death toll is now the highest in the world. CBS News national correspondent Manuel Bajorquez spent the week in Sao Paulo. Here's his report.
When we arrived in Brazil, we knew the crisis at hand, but seeing it up close truly reveals the desperation. No more so than in the nation's hospitals, the ICUs, which are overwhelmed, some running low on the medicines needed to intubate patients. The one we visited in Sao Paulo, all of those are COVID-19 patients. There's no room for others. And the doctor we spoke with said many are younger, in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And once they get here, the odds are not good. In your experience, how many of these 9 people in this one room will recover or not?
Menos da metade.
less than half will recover.
Na maioria dos casos, esses pacientes, a última...
You're the last person they see before they die. The fight against the virus has been a political one from the start. The governor of Sao Paulo State, João Doria, told us he feels like he's fighting the coronavirus and what he calls the Bolsonaro virus, a dig at the country's president, Jair Bolsonaro, who has been widely criticized for his response to the pandemic, for downplaying the virus and resisting calls for lockdowns.
We need at this moment to be united against the virus, not divided.
Are you still advocating for a lockdown right now?
We are advocating lockdown right now. We haven't voted to stay home. At this time, please stay home.
The virus has ravaged Brazil's economy, and as cases surge, so does food insecurity. In one of the poorer sections of town, a favela, we found a young man who, in between bites of a donated lunch, which he says he's come to rely on every day because there's no work, he made it clear to us his options are stark. If you did this, meaning robbing people would be the other option.
Oportunidade. Sem trabalho.
Because there's no opportunity, no oportunidad. We visited Latin America's largest cemetery, and the burials are happening one right after the other. There were about 7 in just the 45 minutes that we were there, and the crews are having to dig up graves and bury bodies around the clock. There is a reason the world is so concerned about what's happening here in Brazil, and not just from the standpoint of human suffering. That's because the more the virus spreads, the more it can mutate.
Our Manny Bajorquez reporting from Brazil. We'll be right back. Thank you for watching. I won't be here for the next couple of months. I'll be taking some time with my husband and son to welcome our new baby, but you will be in very good hands. We're bringing in a familiar face to fill the moderator's chair. In the meantime, my colleague, John Dickerson. John?
Hello, Margaret. It's a lucky club to have a mother for a journalist, and I can't wait to meet our newest member. But until then, we'll take care of things here, and we'll have it ready for you when you're back. So to all of you viewers out there for Face the Nation, we'll see you next week.